All right, guys, it is time to find out the answer to the most defining question of our times. Which AI is best at poker? Because right now there is a huge tournament running created by the folks at Google DeepMind and their sister company Kaggle to see which of all the different LLMs that you probably use every day are best at playing heads-up poker. The team behind this have taken the most popular LLMs in use today and matched them up against each other over 900,000 hands, which any of you fellow poker players out there know is a very statistically significant sample size. That said, there is someone who's been taking an even deeper dive into all these hands this week. Polk over on his YouTube channel, where he's been making these hilarious analysis videos. And given he used to literally be the #1 heads-up player on Earth, I figured we should compare notes. So if you want to find out which current AI model is the best at poker, which one is the fishiest, and which one is the tiltiest, this is a conversation for you. Thank you so much for joining. I've been dying to sort of ask your opinion on this because you actually played against the OG superhuman bot Libratus back in 2017. So first question, how do these LLMs stack up against that?
Yeah, so there were two versions of that bot from Carnegie Mellon, and I played in the first one against Claudico, and then the second one against Libratus. I actually didn't play, but a lot of my co-workers or people that I studied with did. So I got to see kind of behind the scenes. I tried to like coach the human resistance a little bit, give them some pointers and stuff. Those even the first version of that Claudico was so much better than these LLMs at poker. It's night and day, and it's really interesting to me because you would think that you would see like a core kind of like equilibrium strategy at least attempted here, but it wasn't like that whatsoever. Whereas those bots were really trying to play like a good balanced play style that was hard to beat no matter what you did. These got in like the weeds trying to exploit each other. Like, oh, he has a lot of fear here. Like the word fear was used a bunch, and because you can see the thinking in the AI, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I don't think he's very afraid. Like, I don't see that. So these are substantially weaker, but again, like those were built to play poker, right? Like the whole point of those was let's like build like a really good program that can beat humans at poker. Whereas these are large language models that are then trying to figure it out. So pretty sizable skill gap between the two.
It's interesting because you see a lot of the reasoning from them, which has a lot of the right words in it. It includes the language, but you also, as a poker player, you read it and you kind of feel that there is not much depth or like a consistent model behind all of those words, right?
It's so funny you say that. I mentioned that a few times in my analysis. I did a few recap videos of this event, and it's like, you're like, yeah, these are all terms, right? Like I know that is a term, mainly. But then the way that they're put together doesn't make sense. And sometimes it's even directly, it contradicts itself. Like the logic will be like, my opponent opens tight and doesn't really like to bluff, so I'm going to re-raise with a weak hand because he folds to pressure. It's like those, like that doesn't make sense. Like those are two completely opposite things. So, I saw a lot of examples of that. I also saw a lot of examples of just like listing, 50 things, right? And then saying a lot of different things about each one, but then not being able to take that and then make it into something concrete that you can actually, take an action on. And they also, they like to say like the confidence of something, like confidence medium, confidence high. Mm-hmm. And those just seemed to be for no rhyme or reason whatsoever. It was just, they would have some degree of confidence for whatever reason they decided they were confident in it.
They didn't try and quantify their confidence in any way?
It mainly would just say confidence level, but in a couple it would say why it was confident or not. But again, kind of what Igor was saying here, it's like they didn't actually mean anything, right? It was just words. It was right. Like they would just say these words, confidence high, but the words would be, yeah, those are terms, but it actually it wasn't connecting the dots and kind of putting it all together in a way that was comprehensive. It was just sort of getting to some kind of answer based on all of these different terms that it was using.
I learned a new term actually during it, or rather an old term that we always used in a new way, which is it on a board of 10-4-3, the turn comes another 10. It's rainbow 10-10-4-3. And I think it's GPT-5 describes it as it's a wet board for tens. And I'm like, wait, it's the opposite of a classically wet board, but if one assumes that wet means there is a lot of something, it's actually kind of right. It's a lot of trip 10s on 10-10-4-3 that are possible in heads-up poker.
Well, but if there's 2 10s now, there are less 10s. So I don't know. I feel like that's just kind of what we're saying earlier, where you're taking a term and putting it in there. But again, it doesn't really mean anything.
They're doing stuff that like someone who has gone away and read every single poker book and every like poker forum that they can, and like internalized all these terms and have like a loose cluster, but they've never actually played poker before. That's how they do it. Like, they're kind of like the ultimate word cell of poker. Yeah. I don't know if you know like the meme shape rotator and word cell. These are word cells. Like, they're great with words, but they can't. It doesn't mean it's actually coming from like a sort of a foundation of logic that applies to this particular thing. Which, in their defense, they haven't. They haven't played lots of poker. They are not trained on actually sort of an embodied playing of this game. They have just read the book, literally.
So, and in fact, I thought it's, given how poor the reasoning and etc. is around it, it's kind of surprising how, in a way, reasonable they played still. It wasn't like race to insane sizes, call with nothing, where it doesn't make sense. There were still many plays that I saw that made kind of sense. Was that also your experience?
It was a mixed bag, and we saw different AIs with different levels of that. Like, for example, the best one, for example, Gemini. Both versions of Gemini that played in this, if you want to go like, what is sound poker, right? Like, what is, like, if you look at a hand and you look at everything that Gemini did, Gemini probably played the most reasonable of all of the bots, in that all of the logic was, not all of it, but most of it was pretty accurate, right? Like, if Gemini put all the money in, it would have a decent line of thought and a concrete solution, and it usually had the best hand when it got in there. But then the result of that was it played way too tight in a ton of situations and just got run down by some of like the maniac AIs that were just playing crazy, because heads up's not really about always having like the nuts, it's not always about having like the nut straight or top boat or things like that. So it's tough because you have to balance those things. You have to be aggressive enough to be going after pots, but then you can't always have like, I am waiting to have this set here, because you can't wait for that. It just takes too long.
Mm. Another thing we notice is they don't seem to know what flushes are.
Oh my God, so many hands. Here's my favorite hand. Okay, on that exact vein, there was a hand in here where, and I forget which 2 AIs it was. It doesn't really matter because they all do this. There was a hand where one opened ace 10 suited, one 3-bet ace king, and the other one called. Okay, so ace king and ace 10 of clubs, and the flop comes jack 9-3, 2 diamonds and 1 club. Okay, so backdoor nut flush draw for ace 10 and backdoor nut flush draw for ace king with just the ace of diamonds, and they just bet, raise, jam, call, and they get all the money in. And I'm thinking to myself, why are they doing this? I go to the ace king, so just the ace of diamonds, just 3 diamonds, and it goes, well, I have the nut flush draw, and so I'm gonna have a lot of equity against everything. And I'm thinking like, okay, you do not have the nut flush draw. You need backdoor running diamonds. I'm like, well, why did ace 10 call it off? I go to ace 10, and it's like, well, I have the nut flush. I got to put all the money. So like they were both so far off what they had. And it wasn't just flushes. Straights did that a lot too. Like, there were a lot of hands. One of the first hands I break down where one of the AIs has jack 10 on 8-7 deuce. And it's like, well, I have an open ender. I mean, what do you guys think? How can it make mistakes that are that simple? That's kind of baffling,
right? Because I can understand flushes to an extent, because it's like they're not numbers, like clubs, spades, and so on. Maybe those are like terms that are very hard to sort of conceptualize. But I would assume like a straight is basically just orders of numbers, and that they can do advanced math. These LLMs, like they the benchmark, most of them at least, is at least high school level, and some of them are like quite advanced math level. So that is really surprising to me.
I don't know if they take the time to do the math though. Like, what is it? It also depends on what they're prompted with to do specifically, right?
In their analysis, they do lots of other math, so they're certainly taking the time to do some math.
They're doing pot odds, right? Quite a bit. They love pot odds
and equity thresholds and stuff like that. Yeah. But or there was another hand where one of them, its logic was, and I'm kind of making up the board, but you'll get the concept. It's like it had like, king 5 on 7-6-4, and it's like, well, if I hit my straight out, it's kind of obvious, because if the 3 rolls off, or if the 3 comes out, it's a 1-card straight, and if the 9 comes out, it's a 1-card straight. And I'm just like, wait, you need the 8 for the straight, like it's basic 5 cards in a row, not able to kind of comprehend that. And there was one hand where I think one of them 3-bet king 5, the flop was 8-6-3, and it check calls, and its logic was, well, with a double gutter, you got to check call here on the flop.
Listen, I will say double gutters are really hard to spot. We have a running joke. I somehow never notice when I have a double gutter. I just somewhat never see the bottom one.
I think you got that one, though. The king 5, I think you got.
I wonder whether it's just because they're general reasoning models, right? Or rather, like multimodal models that are not specifically trained for poker. So I would imagine that they have kind of like general understandings about a lot of things rather than precise ones. So a straight is 3, 4, 6, 7. The 5 makes a straight. The 8 could make a straight, etc. Where I don't know whether it keeps it hard in its context that these are the specific cards in a row rather than, hey, roughly this is kind of like a straight. I'm picturing it like a smart high schooler or a smart college student who has heard of poker but hasn't actually played it, and now they're like being told to play, and there is, what were flushes again? What were straights again? What is, I've heard all these words. And for someone who's playing for the first time, right, who has never actually trained, I'm still kind of surprised. Like, it's doing better than a human playing 5th time poker, I would imagine. Where would you compare it to, like in terms of a normal human's poker journey?
It's much better in a lot of regards and then much worse in others, right? Because one of the first things you learn as a human is like a straight is 5 cards in a row. A flush is 5 of a suit. A flush beats a straight. What hand do I have? That would be the start of a human's journey, right? You would never get to like, okay, well, I have to 3-bet this hand some of the time because he's opening wide. That would be way down the road, whereas they started with that. And another really interesting thing kind of on that is I noticed in a lot of the logic that they don't really think about their range almost at all. Like they'll mention like I can have overpairs or I could have this. But first off, a lot of times they'll say things that are just not true, right? Like they'll say like the guy will call the other AI will call an open, and like, well, you could have ace king, and and it's like, no, we can't. Like those hands are always 3-betting, right? So, but I rarely saw the logic that was like within my range, I have a lot of better hands because of these hands are going to be here. I almost never saw that. I saw lots of, I've seen him bluff a lot. He's very aggressive. The last time he raised the turn when it was nothing. I saw 8-3 off 3-bet. And I made this comment too. It's kind of like a lot of the hands are kind of like, when you started playing poker and you'd have like a friend that's really bad at tournaments and they'd always punt their stack off and like, so it's the guy that remember the Queen 7 guy? Well, now that guy 3-bets again. So I have, and then it's like you're going down this road where you visually can remember that one hand that was a punt. And now all bets are off. You can do whatever you want. Everything is justified. He had Queen 7 there. And they do that. They do like, oh, I saw 8-3, so I can't fold here. They'll say stuff like that, but they rarely consider their range.
Right. So they actually almost tilt. So that was my next question. Do they?
Yeah, they kind of do.
Because they were doing this like with a 100-hand context window, right? So in the beginning of each one, they've basically got no info about each other. By the end, they've picked up some info. One would assume they would probably get better by the end of the context window as a playing style than at the beginning. But I wonder is in this case, if they're actually just really prone to tilt and getting like hung up on one particular bad play of their opponent where they got lucky, they might get worse by the end of the window.
Well, especially because for them, probably the context window takes up a larger and larger portion of their total reasoning that would come in, which would make sense with them over adjusting. Right. It's like, again, it's the guy that plays the first time poker, and now this is the 30th hand in their life. And it's like, hey, this guy has 3-bet, 3-8 off, etc. 3 times out of the 30 hands. Of course, he's going crazy.
He must have a lot of fear.
Bravado.
Another thing that was interesting to me is, and this is coming from a high level of heads up, right? When I'm looking at what opponents are doing, I tend to just look at their statistical, just all the data, and I try to figure out where in the game tree are they ending up too much, where are they not going enough, and then how do I create a strategy that takes them to the places that they don't want to go and fights them where they're fighting hard, right? Because most players have some area that they just fight a lot harder than other areas, but you do it statistically, Like when we were talking about some of, or how much they open, how much they 3-bet, stuff like that. Okay, well, like for example, Grok 3-bet, mid 50s or 60 or some astronomically high number. So I'm playing Grok. If someone's 3-betting me 60%, I'm not going to open hands they're going to fold to 3-bet.
Right.
If they're going to consistently do that for the long run, I'm going to be opening a range I'm ready to defend. I'm going to open tight, and then we're going to go from there. But that's statistical, right? It's like I know that my open can't reach this threshold of equity because I'm going to have to fold to a 3-bet if it's a weak hand. Their logic wasn't like that. It was, he's shown this, and now I've got to do this because he could have that. It's like, it's almost kind of like leveling and based on a showdown rather than, you'd think they'd be very data driven, very like, statistically driven.
Yeah, they didn't keep track of statistics specifically. That's a good point. They were remembering the hands rather than what it meant for the 3-bet range or something like this.
They would also sometimes say things like, my opponent is opening 40 to 50% on the in position, and then I'd look at the sample and it would be 80. Now it could be that they looked at 100 hands and they were 12 hands in and saw 5 open or 3 opens or whatever it is. But it's just so dangerous to take 3 hands and then be like, I have this very concrete, high confidence piece of information based on these 3 hands where he raised. Or sometimes they'll say things like, he's raising, too wide in position, and it'll show the hands that he raised, and it's like Jack 5 offsuit, that's an open.
Right.
6-5 suited, that's an
Very
open.
reasonable.
Ace deuce, it'll just like list correct opens as the logic, and then it'll just like take 3 deuce off versus a 3x, which is a pure fold, 3-bet it, and then just run it. And you're thinking like, well, this guy's opening 60%. You probably don't need to 3-bet 3 deuce off and just triple off, just try and get him to fold. So there were a lot of hands like that too.
It feels like they're playing, the energy is kind of a drunk, excited amateur in 1999. Pre even the poker boom, certainly pre-solvers. But they've happened to have been able to read 2+2 in 2012. So they've read all the lingo. They know the terms, but they don't have any understanding of it, and they just play with like sort of vibes and this idea of sort of reciprocity. They know that they should fight back, but they don't really know how.
But then again, they also have this, which one of my favorite players to play against in poker was always the guy who, you re-raise them, they're like, oh, he's been doing that a lot, and that's 5 mini against Grok 4. And then you bet on the flop, and they're like, oh, I'm going to stick around. Then on the turn, you bet again, and they're like, well, let's see what hands he could have. He could have top pair, he could have an overpair, and they just start giving and count down all the nuts, basically. And then they're like, well, even if he has some bluffs, I'm kind of behind here with my second pair, so I'll fold. And they talk themselves out of it. And 5 mini realized that Grok 4 was re-raising a lot and playing very aggressively, but it would always talk itself out and give up. And it led to 5 mini lost 300 blinds per 100 versus Grok 4.
Yeah.
I've not seen that ever by anyone in the history of poker, which is quite impressive. I wonder what would you, Doug, what do you think you would get in big blinds per 100 against some of these models?
The tough thing is that, well, the number would be high. The tough thing is that you don't know how they might adjust any longer sample, right? Like if it's 100 hands, we reset the frame every time, they would get completely demolished because they would have all of these leaks that I would see quickly. And then I'm not stuck to 100 hand segments, right? They are. So I would know kind of like how they're going to reset. It's almost kind of like that show Severance, where like their minds get like, it's like, we're back here at the office. And I'm like, no, I went home and I know what's going on. Right. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some of these win rates were astronomical. It could be possible. It's 100 big blinds per 100. It's possible. It's a very, very high number.
I mean, if the other models beat each other at over 100 blinds per 100, I would imagine you would extract more.
I think that the net win rates though, I looked at the overall sample from all of these guys. I don't know why I keep saying guys. They're obviously gender neutral. But yeah, when I looked at all of them, I think in general, the one that really got killed was GPT-5 Mini. That one got totally smashed and lost 340,000 over the course of 180K hands. So, almost 2 chips a hand. So almost 100 big blinds per 100.
Yeah.
But that was for the worst one. Some of the other ones are more reasonable. Like the really hyper aggressive ones are also easily beatable. But when someone is just going hard, it's a little bit more difficult because you're going to have to make some hands when someone's just constantly playing that bad. And like, so one of the models like Grok, where it's way too aggressive and just going all in relentlessly, you'd easily beat that one because you don't have to be afraid. But the two best ones, GPT 5.2 and o3, they played generally pretty reasonable. They were just extremely aggressive. So I don't know what that would translate in terms of win rate, but humans are miles ahead of these, miles and miles ahead of these. I think that my win rate over my career was like 10 big wins per 100 over, hundreds of thousands of heads up hands. So when I say I might win at 50, that's my biggest win rate versus anyone ever, right? It's potentially the worst player I've ever played in my life.
Right.
Well, but did you play ever someone who's playing their first through 100th hand of poker in their life?
I think those people would be harder to beat though, because they would not punt and they would be able to read what a flush is. And those are two, pretty big points, I think. So, I don't know. I mean, it's not. The other thing too, if they looked at this from a different way and they thought, okay, I'm much worse than my opponent, so let me make sure to try and minimize loss, it gets way easier to not lose a lot because you can just play much tighter on the button, play much tighter in the big blind, and then you're going to make up some of the gap just by having a lot of strong hands. You're going to lose for sure, but if we're talking about minimizing loss rate, so I don't know, it's difficult to say how it would go. It'd be interesting to see what a good human how it would fare versus these, because it would be a beatdown.
That said, I do feel like once upon a time we were saying there's not going to be a superhuman AI. I think even in 2015 I was like, it's miles away. Online poker's got at least another 10 years, etc., etc. And then Claudico and then Libratus, and now online poker, I don't know, seems pretty, it's not doing great.
Online poker is alive and well over at Club. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks, Liv.
At some point we're going to be like, I feel like these LLMs are going to wipe the smile off our face once again in terms
of. I think that the key to online poker at this point is having algorithms that auto detect when people get too close to equilibrium. That's the big point. Because if you're not doing it automatically, then it's going to be so easy for people to cheat. And certainly there's been a lot of those issues. But I'm a little bearish on AI today. I feel like people talk about AI right now like it's way further than it really is. And I swear to God, if one more person uses ChatGPT to talk to me, one more person, I might lose it. And it always says the same language and it has that long dash in the middle. And I'm like, I know what you're doing. You're running your response to me through ChatGPT. So unless you can't speak English, I'm not cool with it. But I do think overall AI has uses right now, but has to go very far in a lot of other areas. And this is one of those areas that it has a long way to go. And I'm sure it will get there. We're just not there today.
All right. So if you were to try and summarize the different models as personalities or even specific players you've played against in the past, stereotypes, however you want, how would you do it?
Oh man, it's tough to think about these as player types because they don't play in a human way. There's no human example of somebody 3-betting 60% and barreling off every hand. Although if Vanessa Selps was still playing poker, maybe she'd be there with us. But no, it's tough to say. I mean, when I see people like, or when I see the AI models like Gemini 3, where they're just playing super conservative, fit or fold and talking about sets, you kind of think about maybe like old man coffee with his newspaper. It's like, I'm ready to flop a set, maybe that kind of player type. And then, maybe some of the more aggressive models like O3 or GPT 5.2 or Grok, maybe those are like the Scandinavian, the Swedish guys that just 3-bet relentlessly. Maybe an Isildur comparison kind of makes sense for some of these guys. But even for those, these are extreme versions of that. So I wouldn't say that it's like 1-to-1, but maybe that's kind of like the closest I could get with it.
It was quite impressive, the $1 without showdown graph of Grok 4. It just crushed. It just insanely. And then whenever it got to showdown, it was massive loss. But fortunately, people folded enough. People.
When you re-raise and barrel off every hand, your red line will be good.
It was really good.
I mean, if you put another way, if you never fold, then your winnings when someone folds will be good. I did want to say that I thought Claude Opus and Claude Sonnet 4.5, I thought those ones played the most sort of just sensible in terms of just pre-flop strategy and just having a more normalish looking approach to playing. The other ones all kind of ended up into the extremes, but both of the Claudes were pretty like middle of the road.
It's so funny. It does kind of feel like they reflect a little bit the teams that build them in some ways, or at least like the
1000%.
CEOs of the companies and so on.
Anthropic is the
they're
reasonable kind of like
sort of like
straight shooter.
like more like scientists, philosophers, etc. I mean, Gemini's definitely got a lot of people like that too. Obviously, Grok is Elon. ChatGPT is Sam, who's like also
mighty aggressive.
He's pretty aggressive, but used to be a poker player. So it's so interesting how it's reflected in them.
I looked at DeepSeek and thought that it played pretty well pre-flop, and on paper looked like it should do pretty well, but then it would just have these colossal errors where it would just punt a stack in a way that even for the aggressive ones would just be. It almost seemed like it. I know that they don't glitch, but you know what I'm saying. It would call a jam with something. Like there was one hand. I hope this was DeepSeek, but maybe I'm getting it wrong. But there was one hand where it was like one of them 3-bet king 8 and one of them called 10-9, and the flop was queen 7, and the action goes bet raise call brick check jam call.
Wow, king high call off.
It was a pretty sick call. It was good too. But I saw more hands like that from DeepSeek where. If you're just gonna punt 100 blinds off, and you do that somewhat often, it's just hard to overcome even when you're playing pretty reasonable. So that one seemed the most inconsistent, where it seemed like good pre-flop and then post-flop it just had some issues. So
just kind of like a random number generator style. It's just clicking buttons literally.
Yeah, it did seem like that. There was a lot of button clicking going on here, Liv. There was one hand where this is I think my favorite hand. There was one where. I wish I could remember all of the ones. I've just looked at so many hands. They're all morphing together. But there was one where 7-3 of diamonds opened up and 5-4 of spades called. So 7-3 and 5-4. And the flop comes ace-4 deuce. So middle pair versus a gutter and a flush draw. Okay, an actual flush draw, not a what's the term they use for AI where they hallucinate.
Hallucinated flush draw.
Not a hallucination, a real flush
one,
draw.
okay.
And 5-4 leads, and then 7-3 raises, which is good. 5-4 calls. And then the turn's up queen. And it goes check, bet, check raise huge, call.
5-5-4, yeah.
And then the river's at 10. And 5-4 bluff jams, and 7-3 calls it off.
Did it think it had a flush or just because
what did it say?
the other
What was
guy's
its reasoning?
bluffing?
The analysis did not include its hand strength.
Oh, okay.
It just said all.
I'm gonna get you.
It said the diamonds have missed. I'm like, you missed the diamonds. the best part is you have the 3 of diamonds too, so there's only one even
frankly,
diamond.
It sounds like a hand you see on Hustler Casino live.
Yeah. Well, but none of these were money laundering.
Oh. All righty. Sweet. Thank you so much, Doug.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for watching, guys. And huge thanks to Doug for joining. Do go check out his videos, not only on the game arena. He's done a few of these now, but in general, they're just absolutely hilarious. And of course, if you want to take a look at all of these hands yourself, the results of this tournament, head over to kaggle.com and go to Game Arena. You'll find it all there. Thanks again for joining. This is the Win-Win Podcast.